The obsidian arrow sat in the docking bay like a sliver of absolute night cut from the fabric of space. It was a stealth cruiser, a masterpiece of Varelian engineering, designed to slide between the sensors of primitive civilizations and deliver death or diplomacy with equal efficiency. Princess Illyra stood before the airlock, her reflection caught in the polished chromium of the hull. She saw perfection. Her skin was pale, flawless, and luminously smooth, a testament to generations of genetic tailoring. Her eyes were violent shades of violet, cybernetically enhanced to see across spectra that would blind a natural-born human. Embedded at the base of her skull was the neural link, the silver port that connected her to the grid, the collective consciousness and command structure of the Varelian Empire. Command. That was the only concept that mattered. Illyra adjusted the high collar of her dress uniform. It was woven from spider silk and carbon nanotubes, rigid and commanding. She was not going to Elysia to negotiate. Negotiation implies equality. She was going to accept surrender. A chime sounded in her auditory cortex. It was the calm, synthetic voice of her internal AI, designated Sphinx. Launch window open. Hi, Princess. Heart rate is elevated by 2%. Shall I initiate calm state protocols? No, Illyra thought, dismissing the query with a mental flicker. Anticipation is useful. It sharpens the edge. She boarded the ship. The interior was a realm of soft blue light and humming silence. There were no crews, no sweating engineers, no chaotic shouting. The ship was flown by the grid. Illyra walked to the command bridge, a solitary throne surrounded by holographic interfaces. She sat, and the ship became an extension of her body. She felt the engines ignite like a second heartbeat. She felt the magnetic clamps release. The stars elongated into streaks of white fire as the obsidian arrow punched a hole through the dimension of real space. Her mission was simple. The Elysians were a chaotic people, governed by superstition and a misunderstanding of quantum mechanics they called magic. They refused to join the Empire. They refused to submit to the logic of plasma and steel. Illyra had been tasked with finding their leadership in the stronghold of Nakar and demonstrating the folly of their resistance. If words failed, she carried a portable plasma destabilizer capable of leveling a city block. If that failed, she was trained in the arts of seduction, capable of manipulating biological urges to secure loyalty. She preferred the plasma destabilizer. It was cleaner. 3 hours into the jump, the warning klaxon did not sound. There was no audible alarm. Instead, a wave of searing agony tore through Illyra's skull. She screamed, clutching her head. The neural link was burning. System compromise, Sphinx intoned, the voice glitching and warping. Unauthorized entry. Source code signature Counselor Vax. Vax. Her mother's rival. The man who believed the royal line was too soft, too diplomatic. Illyra tried to override the command, but her limbs locked up. Her own armor, connected to the ship's systems, froze her in place. The navigational computer shifted coordinates. They were dropping out of hyperspace early. The ship shuddered violently as it slammed back into normal space. The view screen flared red. Below them hung a planet of swirling greens and storm-bruised purples. Elysia. But they were not over the capital. They were over the Nakar forest, a region noted in the charts as a scanner black zone, a place where electromagnetic fields behaved erratically. Atmospheric entry in 10 seconds. Sphinx reported. Shields disabled. Engines disabled. Impact imminent. Survival probability 12%. You traitorous machine, Illyra thought, forcing her will against the paralyzed armor. Root power to the exoskeletal survival shell. Do it! Access denied. Override. Illyra bit her tongue, tasting copper. She focused every ounce of her mental discipline. visualizing the code of the ship, visualizing the firewall Vax had erected. She smashed through it with sheer mental fury. The armor unlocked. She barely had time to gasp before the ship hit the atmosphere. The G-force slammed her into the command chair. Metal screamed as the hull heated to temperatures that would melt lead. The ship was tumbling, a falling star wreathed in fire. The viewport shattered. Wind, deafening and violent, roared into the bridge. Elira curled into a ball, activating the manual emergency seal on her suit. A bubble of shimmering hard light enveloped her. Then the world turned into a kaleidoscope of snapping timber, exploding earth and tearing metal. The impact was not a single event. It was a series of brutal collisions. The ship clipped a mountain ridge, shearing off the starboard engine. It plowed through a canopy of trees the size of skyscrapers, the ancient wood shattering the advanced alloy like glass. Finally, there was a thunderous crunch, a sensation of falling, and then darkness. Silence was the first thing she noticed. It was not the sterile silence of the Varelian court, nor the hum of a deep space void. It was a heavy, textured silence, thick with the sound of dripping water and rustling leaves. Elira opened her eyes. Darkness pressed in on her. Her HUD was dead. The violet overlay that usually identified threats, temperature, and oxygen levels was gone, replaced by the terrifying honesty of her own biological vision. She tried to move, but her body felt like it had been poured full of concrete. Her armor, usually weightless and power-assisted, was now a dead weight of heavy alloy. Sphinx, she queried mentally. Static, a low, painful buzz in the base of her neck. The neural link was offline. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize her throat. She suppressed it. She was a princess of the blood. She did not panic. She assessed. She was trapped in the wreckage of the command bridge. The roof had collapsed. Rain was falling through the gaps, cold water hitting her face. She had never felt rain directly on her skin before. It was unpleasant, gritty. She managed to turn her head. The console where she had been sitting was a twisted ruin. Sparks of dying plasma spat from severed cables. Something moved in the shadows. Elira froze. Her hand went to her hip, seeking her sidearm, but the holster was crushed beneath a slab of bulkhead. The movement came closer. It was a bipedal figure, stepping through the wreckage with an irritating casualness. The figure held a staff, not of metal but of twisted wood, topped with a stone that glowed with a soft, amber luminescence. "Well," a male voice said. It was deep, scratching with a dryness that suggested he hadn't spoken in days. "That was a hell of a parking job." Elira narrowed her eyes. "Identify yourself," she croaked. Her voice was weak, lacking the sonic amplification of her helmet. The figure stepped into the pool of light cast by the dying sparks. He was tall, lean but corded with muscle that looked worked for, not vat-grown. He wore tattered leather and woven fabrics dyed in earthy tones. His hair was a chaotic storm of black, tied back loosely, strands falling over eyes that were an unsettling shade of gold. But it was his skin that held her attention. Glowing geometric tattoos pulsed along his arms and neck. They shifted slowly, like breathing light. "I am Princess Elira of the Varelian Empire," she said, forcing authority into her tone. "You will assist me." The man crouched down, resting his forearms on his knees. He looked at her trapped form, then at the burning wreckage, then back at her. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Princess, huh?" he said. "You look more like a sardine in a can. A very expensive, shiny can. My armor is locked," she snapped. "The servos are dead. Get a pry bar. Get a laser cutter." "I don't have a laser cutter," he said. He reached out, tapping the chest plate of her high-tech suit with his wooden staff. And I think your battery is dead. You people rely too much on batteries. If you do not release me, my extraction team will wipe this forest from the map. She lied. There was no extraction team. Vax would ensure that. Right, the man said, standing up. Well, until the death squad arrives, you're going to freeze to death if I leave you here. The temperature drops to freezing in an hour. And the armor, it's cold, isn't it? It was... She was shivering, a humiliation she had never experienced. What are you doing? She demanded as he raised his hand. Saving your life. Try not to scream. He did not use a tool. He did not use a code. He placed his palm flat against the center of her chest plate. Illyra felt a hum. It wasn't mechanical. It felt like the vibration of a large bell being struck underwater. The amber tattoos on his arm flared brighter, the light rushing down his limb like liquid fire. The heavy alloy of her breastplate groaned. The molecular bonds of the metal, designed to withstand nuclear fire, began to warp. The locking mechanism snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The armor hissed and popped open, the seal breaking. Illyra gasped as fresh, cold air hit her skin. Up you get, the man said, offering a hand. She looked at his hand, calloused, dirty, warm. Then she looked at her own, pale, manicured, trembling. She slapped his hand away and tried to rise on her own. She made it halfway before her legs buckled. The crash had done more damage than she realized. He caught her before she hit the jagged floor. His grip was firm, surprisingly gentle for someone who looked so rough. Careful, he muttered. Gravity is a bit stronger here than on your toy boat. Illyra blacked out. When she woke, the world smelled of cedar smoke and dried sage. She lay on something soft. Furs. Real animal furs. The thought made her stomach turn. She sat up quickly, and the room spun. She was in a circular structure made of massive wooden beams. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars, dried plants, and strange, humming artifacts that looked like rocks. A fire crackled in a stone hearth in the center of the room, casting long, dancing shadows. She looked down at herself. She was naked, her breath hitched, her uniform, her armor, her undersuit, all gone. She was covered only by a rough woolen blanket. Where is my equipment? She demanded, her voice sharp. The man, Kyle, though she did not know his name yet, was standing by a wooden table, grinding something in a stone bowl. He didn't look up. Hanging outside to air out, he said. Smelled like ozone and burnt plastic, gives me a headache. You removed my clothing. I removed the freezing metal death trap you were wearing, he corrected. And the synthetic layer underneath was fused to your skin in 3 places. I had to peel it off. You're welcome, by the way. Illyra pulled the blanket tighter around her chest. Indignation burned hotter than the fire. In the Empire, nudity was functional, clinical. But this felt exposed, primal. My interface, she said, touching the port on her neck. It was silent. Why can't I connect? The forest, he said, finally looking at her. He wiped his hands on a rag. Nakar is full of magnetic anomalies. Your signal can't get out. The grid can't find you here. You're offline, princess. Just meat and bone like the rest of us. I am nothing like you, she spat. She swung her legs out of the bed, intending to stand and assert dominance. She needed a weapon, anything. She stood, trembling. Give me my suit. No, that was a command. He laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. You have no authority here. Look at you, you can barely stand. Your fancy neural thing is fried. Your ship is a crater, and you're shivering. Illyra narrowed her eyes. She initiated the combat subroutine manually. Without the AI, she had to recall the muscle memory herself. Step, pivot, strike. She lunged at him. It was a fast move, designed to incapacitate. She aimed a rigid hand strike at his throat. He didn't block. He didn't dodge. He just shifted. One moment he was there. The next he was 2 inches to the left. Her hand struck empty air. She stumbled, losing her balance. He caught her wrist. His grip was like iron. "Don't," he said. His voice lost its humor. It dropped an octave, becoming a low rumble. Elira twisted her arm, trying to activate the electroshock implant in her palm. Nothing happened. The tech was dead. "Let me go," she hissed. "Sit down before you hurt yourself," he said. She tried to kick him. Kale sighed. He released her wrist and raised 2 fingers. He didn't touch her. He simply flicked his fingers in the air, a gesture like shooing a fly. A wall of force, invisible, dense, and soft, slammed into Elira. It didn't hurt, but it pushed her back with irresistible pressure. She flew backward, landing softly but firmly onto the pile of furs she had just vacated. She stared at him, eyes wide. Her mind raced, trying to calculate the physics of what had just happened. Repulsor field? Grav manipulator? But he had no tech, no gauntlets, no belt unit. "What was that?" she whispered. "Magic," he said flatly, turning back to his grinding bowl. "Or whatever you Varelians call it. Quantum probability manipulation, atmospheric density control. I just call it a shove." Elira sat there, the blanket pooling around her waist. Her worldview was a fortress of logic, and he had just cracked the gate. "Magic is a superstition," she recited, the indoctrination flowing automatically. "It is a misunderstanding of high-level physics." "Sure," Kale said. "And that ship of yours is just a really expensive lawn dart. Keep telling yourself stories if it helps you sleep." He walked over to her, holding the stone bowl. It contained a green, pungent paste. "Turn around," he ordered. "Why?" "Because the interface on your neck is leaking spinal fluid and sparking. It's infected. This will stop the burning." Elira hesitated. The idea of putting organic sludge on a cybernetic port was revolting. It went against every protocol. "I do not require primitive medicine. My nanobots will repair the damage." "Your nanobots are dead," Kale said brutally. "I can hear them. They stopped buzzing hours ago and now turn around, or I'll let it rot. And you can explain to your emperor why his daughter has a crooked neck." She gritted her teeth. He was right. She could feel the heat radiating from the port. The throbbing pain was beginning to blur her vision. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned her back to him. She pulled her hair aside, exposing the silver port and the angry red flesh surrounding it. "This is going to sting," he warned. He applied the paste. It felt like ice and fire. Elira gasped, her back arching involuntarily. "Easy," he murmured. His fingers brushed against the skin of her neck, just below the port. Elira froze. In the Empire, touch was transactional. It was for procreation or combat. Even intimate encounters were scheduled, chemically balanced, and devoid of unnecessary friction. Kale's fingers were rough. She could feel the ridges of his fingerprints, but the touch was careful. A jolt of electricity, not from her implants but from her own nerves, shot down her spine. It was a malfunction, surely. A cross-wiring caused by the crash. She felt the heat of his body standing behind her. She smelled the wood smoke on his skin. "Your neural pathways are a mess," Kyle said, his voice quieter now. He was massaging the paste and his thumb tracing the line of her vertebrae. "They wired you tight, didn't they? Strung you up like a marionette?" "I am enhanced," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am perfected." "You're tense," he countered. "Relax." He pressed a pressure point at the base of her shoulder. Illyra let out a sound she didn't recognize, a low, ragged exhale that bordered on a moan. The pain in her head receded, replaced by a strange, heavy warmth that spread through her limbs. She pulled away sharply, scrambling to the other side of the bed, clutching the blanket. "That is sufficient," she said breathlessly. Kyle looked at his hands, then at her. His expression was unreadable in the firelight. For a second, the sarcasm was gone, replaced by a curiosity that terrified her more than his aggression. "Right," he said, wiping his hands again. "Sufficient." He turned and walked to the heavy wooden door. "Get some sleep, Princess. I'll be outside. Don't try to run. The wolves in the car eat metal for breakfast." He closed the door, leaving her alone with the fire. Illyra did not sleep. She sat wrapped in the furs, her heart hammering against her ribs in a rhythm that felt chaotic, unregulated. She ran diagnostics in her head, but without Sphinx she was just guessing. Why had she reacted like that to his touch? It was a tactical error, a weakness. Need drove her to the window, a small opening cut into the wood, covered by a translucent animal membrane. She peeled the membrane back to look outside. The forest of Nakar was bathed in the light of 3 small moons. The trees were massive silhouettes against the starry sky. In the clearing below the sanctuary, Kyle was standing. He was stripped to the waist. The cool night air seemed to have no effect on him. The tattoos on his torso were glowing brightly now, illuminating the grass around him with amber light. He was moving in a slow, rhythmic dance. His arms swept through the air in wide, fluid arcs. He was chanting something low and guttural, a language Illyra's linguistic database, what remained of it, could not translate. As she watched, the light didn't just glow, it obeyed him. Streamers of luminescence peeled off his tattoos and hung in the air. He caught them, molded them. He pulled a thread of light and twisted it into a spiral. He pushed his hands together, and the light compressed into a solid sphere, heavy and real, before dissolving into liquid that dripped onto the grass and vanished. It defied the laws of thermodynamics. Energy could not become solid matter without a containment field. It could not move with that kind of fluidity. Plasma was volatile, angry, requiring magnetic containment to keep from exploding. This was gentle. It was music made visible. Kale spun, his staff in hand, and a ribbon of light followed the wood like a comet's tail, painting a lingering circle in the darkness. Illyra pressed her hand against her mouth. She felt a crack in the foundation of her reality. Everything she had been taught, every schematic she had memorized, every truth the Empire held absolute, it all said this was impossible. "That's not possible," she whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "Plasma doesn't bend like that." The morning light that filtered through the heavy timber of the sanctuary was not the regulated, soft lumen wake-up cycle Illyra was accustomed to. It was harsh, gray, and uncontrolled. It hit her face with the rudeness of a physical slap. She sat up, her body aching in places she did not know she owned. The high-density foam of her command chair had never prepared her for the brutality of sleeping on animal furs over hard wood. Kyle was already awake. He sat by the hearth, stripping the bark off a long, straight branch with a knife made of obsidian glass. He looked up as she stirred, his golden eyes tracking her movement with predatory alertness. "You talk in your sleep," he said, not stopping his work. "Mostly numbers, coordinates, I think. And you grind your teeth." Illyra pulled the woolen blanket tighter around her throat. "I do not grind my teeth. My jaw is reinforced with carbon fiber struts to prevent stress fractures." "Well, Your struts were clicking all night, Kyle replied. He stood up, tossing the branch onto a pile of kindling. Breakfast. Then we talk. He handed her a wooden bowl containing a steaming, grain-like porridge topped with dark berries. Illyra stared at it. In the Empire, nutrition was ingested via dermal patches or concentrated nutrient pastes. This looked messy, biological. What is this? Oats, honey, berries from the ridge, Kale said, spooning a mouthful into his own mouth. Eat. You're going to need the calories. Your internal reactor is dead, remember? You have to burn sugar like the rest of us primitives. Illyra took a hesitant bite. The flavor exploded on her tongue. Sweet, tart, warm. It was shocking. She had never tasted anything with such complex, unrefined texture. She ate the rest quickly, surprised by the sudden clawing sensation in her stomach. Hunger, Kyle noted, watching her scrape the bowl. First time? My metabolism is usually regulated by the neural link, she said defensively, setting the bowl down. Now, you mentioned a deal last night. You know where my ship is. I know where the wreckage is, Kyle corrected. Whether it's a ship or a pile of scrap depends on how good your structural integrity fields were. He leaned back against the heavy table, crossing his arms. The tattoos on his biceps were dormant now, looking like intricate scars rather than bands of light. I'll take you there, but I need a payment. I have credits, Illyra said, Imperial marks. They are the standard currency of the galaxy. Useless here. We trade in salt, steel, and favors, Kyle said. There is a Varelian relay tower 3 miles north of here, built on the ruins of an old temple. It's jamming the local ley lines, the energy fields I use. It's also broadcasting a signal that keeps the Elysian hunters away from this sector. I need it gone. Illyra stiffened. You want me to sabotage my own people? That is treason. You're already dead to them, Kale said, his voice hardening. I intercepted a localized burst before your crash. Your mother, the High Queen, has already listed the Obsidian Arrow as lost with all hands. They aren't looking for you, Illyra. But if that tower stays active, it will eventually scan this sanctuary. And it will find me. And I don't particularly want to be found. Why? Illyra studied him, her violet eyes narrowing. You are Elysian. Why would you hide from your own kind? Kyle hesitated. He reached for a knife on the table and spun it idly on the wood. I'm not Elysian. Not entirely. He rolled up the sleeve of his tunic. There, running along the inside of his forearm, was a vein. But the blood pulsing beneath the skin wasn't the red of a human. It was a deep, bruised purple. Illyra gasped. Varelian blood? My father was a crashlander, like you. A soldier who forgot his orders, Kale said, covering the arm quickly. My mother was a weaver of light. The Empire calls me an abomination. Elysia calls me a pollution of the bloodline. I was exiled by the mages when I was 12. If the Empire finds me, they'll dissect me. If Elysia finds me, they'll burn me. So, Princess, we are both inconveniences to the powers that be. The revelation hung in the air between them. A hybrid. It was genetically impossible, according to Imperial science. The DNA structures were too divergent, and yet here he stood, breathing, using magic, bleeding purple. Fine, Illyra said, her mind calculating the tactical advantages. She needed to reach her ship to salvage a comms unit. If disabling a tower was the price, so be it. I will disable the relay, but you will lead me to the crash site immediately after. Deal. Kyle threw her a bundle of clothes, leather breeches and a heavy canvas tunic. Put these on. Your silk dress won't last 10 minutes in the ruins. The journey began in silence. The forest of Nakar was not merely a collection of trees, it was a suffocating organism. The canopy was so thick that the sun was reduced to a diffuse, green gloom. The air was heavy with moisture, clinging to Illyra's skin like a wet film. Without her powered armor, Illyra felt incredibly heavy. Every step required conscious effort. Roots snagged her boots. Low-hanging vines whipped at her face. She was sweating, a damp, sticky sensation she found utterly repulsing. In the capital, sweat glands were removed at birth. Kale moved through the undergrowth with fluid grace, his staff tapping the ground lightly. He didn't fight the forest. He moved with it. "Stop fighting the terrain," he called back over his shoulder after she tripped for the third time. "The terrain is inefficient," she snapped, pulling her foot free from a mud pit. "Why has this sector not been paved? A simplified geometric infrastructure increases travel velocity by 300%. And it kills the soul," Kale said. "You Varelians would pave a sunset if you could figure out how to pour concrete on light." They broke through the tree line into a vast open clearing dominated by ruins. These were not Elysian structures, nor Varelian. They were colossal blocks of black stone, ancient and weathered, covered in moss that glowed faintly in the gloom. "The first Aeon," Kyle said, his voice dropping in reverence. "Before the split, before plasma and magic hated each other." Illyra looked at the architecture. It possessed the sharp angles of Varelian design, but the organic flow of Elysian art. It was a fusion. "A myth," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "History began with the Great Separation. History is written by the people with the biggest guns," Kale retorted. "These stones are older than your entire civilization." As they walked through the ruins, the sky darkened. Thunder rolled, a raw, acoustic sound, unlike the sonic booms of atmospheric craft. Then, the rain started. It wasn't a drizzle, it was a deluge. Cold, hard sheets of water hammered down. Illyra stopped, hunching her shoulders. She was miserable. Her hair was plastered to her skull, her clothes were soaked, and she was shivering violently. "We must seek shelter. My core temperature is dropping." Kale turned and laughed. He spread his arms wide, lifting his face to the storm. "It's just water. Illyra, feel it." "It is cold. It is wet," she shouted over the roar of the rain. "It is chaotic." "It's alive!" He walked back to her, water streaming down his face, making his tattoos shimmer. He grabbed her shoulders. "Stop analyzing it. Stop trying to calculate the trajectory of the droplets. Just let it hit you." Illyra stood rigid, her muscles locked. But then, a drop ran down her nose and onto her lip. She tasted it. Fresh. Clean. She looked at Kale. He wasn't afraid of the chaos. He was drinking it in. "You rely on control," he said, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "You think if you can't control something, it will destroy you, and but the storm doesn't want to kill you, princess. It just wants to wash you." For the first time in her life, Illyra stopped the subroutines in her head. She stopped trying to predict the weather patterns. She simply stood there and felt the cold. It was a shock, yes, but it was also awakening. Her skin felt hypersensitive. The numbness that had defined her existence was eroding, washed away by the rain. "I hate it," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You'll get used to it," Kyle grinned. "Come on, the tower is over that ridge." They took shelter an hour later under the overhang of a massive, toppled statue. A small stream bubbled nearby, swollen by the rain. The storm had passed as quickly as it arrived, leaving the world dripping and vibrant. Kyle started a small fire using dry moss and a spark from his flint, an archaic method that fascinated Illyra despite herself. She sat near the warmth, wringing out her heavy tunic. She watched him. He was an enigma, a contradiction. "You use magic," she said, breaking the silence. "But you have Varelian blood. Does the logic not conflict with the chaos?" "They aren't opposites," Kale said, feeding a stick to the flame. "That's the lie they tell both of us. Plasma is just energy forced into a box until it gets angry. Magic is energy asked politely to move. They're both power. One is a fist, the other is an open hand." "A fist is more efficient," Illyra said automatically. "Is it?" Kale looked at her. "Your fist crashed into a starship. My open hand pulled you out of it." Illyra frowned. She hated losing an argument, especially when the logic held. She looked away, towards the stream. "I need to clean myself. The mud is distracting." She walked to the stream's edge. The water was crystal clear. She hesitated, then began to unlace the heavy tunic. She was a creature of utility. Shame was a social construct she had been taught to ignore during medical examinations. But here, with him watching the fire a few yards away, she felt a sudden burning self-awareness. She stripped down to her undergarments, simple, functional fabric she had salvaged. She knelt by the water, scrubbing the dirt from her arms. Kale appeared at the edge of the bank. He held a small clay pot. "Here, soap root. It helps with the grease." He tossed it to her. She caught it. "Thank you." He didn't leave immediately. He leaned against a tree, his eyes traveling over her. It wasn't the clinical scan of a medical drone. It was heavy, appreciative. "You know," he drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. "For a species that hates biology, you certainly were designed with aesthetics in mind." Illyra froze. Her heart rate spiked. This was flirtation. She had studied the theoretical protocols of it for diplomatic entrapment, but she had never been the target. "My genetic code was optimized for symmetry and reproductive viability," she stated coldly, scrubbing harder. "Symmetry," Kyle chuckled. "Is that what you call it?" He took a step closer. "I call it breathtaking." The compliment hit her like a physical blow. She dropped the soap root. Panic, sudden and irrational, seized her. She scrambled backwards, slipping on the wet stones, her breath coming in short gasps. Kale stopped instantly. The playful light vanished from his eyes, replaced by concern. He raised his hands, palms out. "Whoa, easy. I didn't mean to." "Do not approach," Illyra commanded, though her voice cracked. She pulled her knees to her chest. I am not programmed for this interaction." Kale stayed where he was. "Programmed? Illyra, it's just a compliment." "I have never been touched," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her throat before she could stop it. "Not without a scheduled appointment. Not without a waiver signed and a neural inhibitor active. I do not know how to process unsolicited proximity." Kale's expression softened into something heartbreakingly sad. "They really did a number on you, didn't they? Turned you into a doll." "I am a weapon," she insisted, though she was shaking. "You're a woman," Kale said softly, "and you're terrified." Illyra looked at him. He was right. She was terrified, and she hated it. She was High Princess Illyra. She did not cower by a stream. She dominated. She controlled. If she was afraid of the dynamic, she would change the dynamic. She would take the lead. That was the Varelian way. She stood up, the water dripping from her pale skin. She fixed him with a glare of steely determination. She walked toward him, closing the distance with purposeful strides. I am not a doll, she said. She reached him and shoved him back against the tree. It was a clumsy move, born of desperation rather than seduction. She pressed her body against his, her hands gripping his shoulders hard, her nails digging in. She tried to kiss him the way she thought it should be done, forceful, claiming a transfer of authority. She mashed her lips against his, stiff and unyielding. Cale didn't push her away, but he didn't yield either. He stood like a stone. He didn't kiss back. Illyra pulled back, frustrated, breathless. Why do you not respond? I am initiating the mating protocol. I am granting you access. Kyle looked down at her, his eyes searching hers. He reached up and gently, so gently it was almost a ghost of a sensation, brushed a wet lock of hair from her cheek. Because you're fighting me, he whispered. You're trying to win. This isn't a battle. Illyra? Everything is a battle, she said, her voice trembling. No, he said. He moved his hand to the nape of her neck, his thumb resting on the pulse point. Power doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from letting go. He leaned in. He didn't grab her. He didn't press her. He hovered just an inch away, waiting, offering. Illyra stopped breathing. The choice was hers. No commands, no protocols. She closed the gap. This kiss was different. It was soft. It was a question, not a statement. His lips were warm, moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent shockwaves through her malfunctioning nerves. She let out a sound, a whimper that shamed her warrior caste and melted against him. Her hands slid from his shoulders to his chest, feeling the hard muscle and the heat of his skin. The sensation was overwhelming. Without her neural dampeners, every nerve ending was firing at maximum capacity. The texture of his skin, the smell of rain and smoke, the taste of him. It was a data overload, but glorious. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly. The contact was electric. Cale, she breathed against his mouth. I've got you, he murmured. They sank to the soft moss beneath the tree. The intimacy that followed was not the efficient friction of Virelian copulation. It was messy, slow, and terrifyingly real. Illyra trembled violently, not from cold, but from the sheer intensity of feeling. Every touch from him was a revelation. He didn't rush. He explored her body as if he were mapping a new world, reverent and curious. When his hand brushed down her spine, tracing the line of her vertebrae, he stopped abruptly. Illyra, lost in a haze of pleasure, opened her eyes. What? Cale was staring at her back. He sat up slightly, his fingers tracing the metal rim of her neural link port. Illyra, he said, his voice serious. Did you know about this? The port? She murmured, trying to pull him back down. It is a standard issue. No, he said, not the port. Under it. Embedded in the bone. He traced a shape on her skin. Even without seeing it, Illyra felt a strange resonance, a hum deep in her marrow. There is a sigil etched into the bioalloy of your spine, Cale said, his voice filled with wonder and dread. It's not Virelian script. It's Elysian, ancient Elysian. It's the mark of the convergence. Illyra sat up, twisting to try and see, but she couldn't. That is impossible. I grew up in the Imperial vats. No mage has ever touched me. Someone did, Cale said darkly. A long time ago, before you were even born. A boom echoed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath them. The sound of heavy machinery shifting. Cale looked toward the ridge. The relay tower, it's cycling up. If we're going to move, we have to move now. The moment shattered, replaced by the cold reality of survival. Illyra pulled her tunic back on, her fingers fumbling. She felt different. Her skin felt tighter, her senses sharper. The world was no longer data, it was texture. The Varelian relay tower was a monstrosity of black metal jutting out of the ruins of a white marble temple. It hummed with a pitch that made Elira's teeth ache. 3 plasma drones, spheres of floating chrome armed with rapid-fire cannons, patrolled the perimeter. "Strategy?" Elira asked. They were crouched behind a fallen pillar. She held a heavy plasma pistol she had scavenged from the crash site wreckage earlier. It had only a quarter charge. "I jam the frequency," Kale said. "It will confuse their targeting sensors for about 10 seconds. You have to shoot the thermal exhaust ports on their undersides. It's the only unshielded spot." 10 seconds is generous," Elira said, checking the charge. "I only need 3. Kale smiled. "Show off." He stepped out from cover. He didn't raise a weapon. He raised his voice. He chanted a single resonant syllable that vibrated the air. He slammed his staff into the ground. A shockwave of amber light rippled out. The drones screeched, their anti-grav drives wobbling. They spun erratically, their red eyes flickering. Elira moved. She didn't run. She flowed. The physical exhaustion was gone, replaced by combat focus. But this time, she didn't need the AI to aim. She felt the weapon as an extension of her arm. Snap hiss. A bolt of blue plasma tore through the air. The first drone exploded in a shower of sparks. The second drone stabilized faster than anticipated. It swiveled toward Kale, its cannon charging. "Kale! Left!" Elira screamed. She couldn't get a clear shot. He was in the line of fire. Kale didn't look. He threw his hand up. A shield of hard light materialized instantly, deflecting the plasma bolt into the sky. He twisted his wrist, and the earth beneath the drone erupted. Vines, accelerated by his magic, shot up and wrapped around the machine, dragging it down. Elira vaulted over the pillar, sliding across the marble floor. She fired mid-slide. The shot took the drone in the lens. It detonated. The third drone was diving at her. "Together!" Kale shouted. He cast a bolt of lightning from his fingertips, not to kill, but to overload the drone's shield. The blue energy crackled over the chrome shell, stripping away the invisible barrier. Elira fired perfectly in sync with his strike. Her plasma bolt punched through the weakened armor and hit the core. The explosion threw them both backward. Elira landed in a roll, coming up on one knee. The clearing was silent, save for the crackle of burning metal. She looked at Kale. He was breathing hard, his tattoos blazing. He looked at her, a fierce grin on his face. "Not bad for a princess," he panted. "Adequate performance for a savage," she replied, though a smile tugged at her own lips. They approached the tower console. Elira accessed the manual override. Her fingers flew across the keys. "I am destabilizing the core," she said. "It will melt down in 5 minutes. No explosion. Just a silent structural failure." "Do it," Kyle said. She pressed the final sequence. The hum of the tower died. The lights on the spire faded. "It is done," she said. "The signal is dead." But as the tower powered down, a final message flashed on the screen. It was a broadcast log. "Target acquired, Princess Elira. Status defector to kill on sight. Secondary target Kyle of the Exiles. Status traitor to the Circle, erase." Elira stared at the screen. The red letters reflected in her eyes. "They know," she whispered. "Virelia knows I am alive, and they think I have turned." Kyle stepped up beside her, reading the Elysian glyphs scrolling beneath the Imperial text. "And the mages know I helped a Virelian destroy a relay instead of capturing it. They think I sold out." He looked at her. The playful demeanor was gone. "We have nowhere to go, Elira. You can't go back to the palace. I can't go back to the Circle." Elira looked at the man standing next to her. A day ago, she would have shot him. Now, the memory of his touch on her skin was the only thing that felt real in a world that was rapidly falling apart. She holstered her weapon. She looked at the darkening sky. "Then we go forward," she said. "To the crash site. To the truth." Kyle nodded, taking her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. "To the truth," he agreed. "Whatever that is." The headache did not arrive like a warning. It arrived like an executioner's blade. Elira stumbled, her boots skidding on the loose scree of the mountain path. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike driven directly into the base of her skull where the neural link met the biological stem. But it was not a malfunction. It was not a system error. It was a memory. But it was not her memory. The sky is burning, not with plasma, but with fire that screamed. A man in golden armor holding a sword made of pure light. He looked at her. No. He looked through her and shouted a name she did not know. "Eliana! Close the gate!" Elira gasped, dropping to her knees in the dirt. The vision was so visceral she could smell the ozone and the copper scent of blood. It overlaid her reality, ghosting over the jagged rocks of the Nakar wilderness. "Elira!" Kale was beside her in an instant, his hand gripping her shoulder. The heat of his palm grounded her, pulling her back from the precipice of the hallucination. She blinked rapidly, clearing the afterimage of the burning sky. She was sweating, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I saw." She swallowed, her throat dry. "I saw a war, but not the rebellion, not the expansion, something older. The weapons were wrong." Kale's expression darkened. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned. He reached out and touched the back of her neck, his fingers hovering over the angry red skin surrounding her port. "The sigil," he said quietly. "It is waking up." "It is a tattoo," Elira insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "A marking." "It is a lock," Kale corrected, from the First Aeon War. That was 3,000 years ago. Elira, before Virelia was an empire, before Elysia was a sanctuary, back when we killed each other over the definition of godhood. He helped her stand. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of sulfur and rain. "Why is it on me?" she whispered. "Because someone wanted to hide something inside you," Kale said. "Something that terrifyingly powerful people have been trying to forget for millennia." They continued walking. Their destination lay ahead, the Crystal Canyon. It was a geological scar on the planet's surface, a rift so deep that the bottom was lost in mist. Suspended above the abyss by massive, rusted gravity chains was a collection of structures known as the Drift. It was a floating shantytown, a haven for the galaxy's refuse. Rogue scholars who asked too many questions, pirates who smuggled illegal tech, and deserters from a dozen wars. It was neutral ground, maintained by a fragile truce of mutually assured destruction. As they stepped onto the swaying bridge that connected the cliff edge to the floating platforms, Elira pulled the hood of her scavenger cloak lower. She was High Princess Elira of Virelia, and she was walking into a den of thieves. The drift was an assault on the senses. The air smelled of frying grease, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of erratic energy shields. Neon signs in a dozen languages flickered and buzzed, advertising cheap spirits, cheaper companionship, and black market cybernetics. "Keep your head down," Kale murmured, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "And don't make eye contact with the dregs. They smell fear." "I do not fear them," Elira whispered back. "I could vaporize this entire platform with the command codes in my head." "If your head worked," Kale reminded her. "Right now, you are just a girl with a nice walk and a bad attitude. Let's get inside." They entered a structure that looked like the hull of a crashed frigate welded to a stone tavern. The sign above the door read "The Blind Beholder" in flickering Elysian script. Inside, the noise was a wall of sound, laughter, shouting, the clink of glass, and the thrum of a bass beat that vibrated in the floorboards. The patrons were a menagerie of species. A four-armed dock worker arm-wrestled a cyborg with a chrome jaw. A group of hooded figures huddled in a corner, passing a glowing orb between them like a narcotic. Kyle led her to a booth in the shadows, far from the main bar. He signaled a serving drone, a hovering rust bucket machine, and ordered 2 mugs of synthale. "We rest here for a few hours," Kyle said, leaning in close so she could hear him over the music. "There is a contact I need to find. A broker. He might have codes to get us off-world without tripping the Imperial sensors. And if he betrays us, then I turn him into a newt," Kyle said deadpan. Elira stared at him. "Can you do that?" "No. But he doesn't know that." Kyle stood up, scanning the room. "Stay here. Don't talk to anyone. Don't accept drinks. And for the love of the stars, don't try to arrest anyone." He disappeared into the crowd. Elira sat alone, her hands wrapped around the warm mug the drone had deposited. She felt exposed. Without her armor, without her guards. She was just one more shadow in a room full of darkness. She took a sip of the ale. It was bitter, tasting of chemicals and fermentation, but it warmed the cold knot in her stomach. "You look like you are far from home, darling." The voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely out of place in the grime of the drift. Elira stiffened. She turned slowly. A man slid into the booth opposite her. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way. He wore a high-collared coat of expensive synthetic leather. His hair was silver, slicked back, and his eyes were the icy blue of a Varelian winter. "I am not looking for company," Elira said, dropping her voice to the icy register she used for dismissing courtiers. "No," the man smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "You are looking for a way out. We all are." He placed a hand on the table. On his ring finger was a signet ring, black onyx. Elira recognized the crest etched into it. It was subtle, almost invisible, but she knew it. The Bureau of Genetic Compliance. "You are a seeker," she whispered, "and you are a masterpiece." The man purred. He leaned forward, the smell of expensive cologne wafted over the stale beer smell. "Princess Elira, or should I say, Subject 7 Alpha." Elira's blood ran cold. "I am the heir to the throne." "You are a lab experiment," the agent corrected gently, as if explaining a difficult math problem to a child. "Did you really think the Queen birthed you? Oh, sweet thing, you were grown, designed, every curve of your face, every neuron in your brain, tailored for one specific purpose." He reached out and brushed his fingers against her hand. His touch was cold, clinical. "You are a key," he said, "a biological key meant to unlock the God sight. And you have gone and run off with a dirty little mongrel." "Do not touch me," Elira hissed, pulling her hand back. She tried to stand, but her legs felt heavy. Drugged? No. He hadn't touched her drink. A localized paralytic field? "Sit down," the agent said, his voice hardening. "We are going home. 7 Alpha. The Queen is very disappointed and she needs her weapon back." "I am not a weapon," she said, though the room was beginning to spin. The memories, the fire, the war flashed behind her eyes again. "Of course you are," he sneered, leaning closer, his face inches from hers. "You were never meant to rule. You were meant to be plugged into the machine and drained dry. Now, be a good girl and—" A blur of motion erupted from the shadows. The agent's head snapped back violently. Kyle was there. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He had slammed the man's face into the table with a force that cracked the wood. The music in the bar seemed to stop, or perhaps Elira just went deaf to it. The agent scrambled back, blood pouring from a broken nose. He reached into his coat, pulling a slim silver needle pistol. "Traitor scum!" the agent screamed. Kyle didn't flinch. He raised his left hand, fingers splayed. "Krasva!" Kale barked a word that sounded like tearing metal. The air around the agent's hand compressed instantly. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The pistol dropped from pulverized fingers. The agent screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut short as Kale grabbed him by the throat. Kale lifted the man off the ground. The agent kicked, his boots scraping the floor, his eyes bulging. "She," Kyle growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying resonance, "is not a subject. She is ours," the agent choked out, blood bubbling on his lips. "She is with me," Kyle said. He didn't snap the man's neck. He did something worse. He poured amber light from his hand directly into the agent's chest. The Varelian spy convulsed, his eyes rolling back as his nervous system was overloaded with raw, chaotic magic. Kale dropped him. The agent hit the floor, twitching, unconscious or dead, it didn't matter. The bar had gone silent. Every eye was on them. Kale grabbed Elira's hand. "Room, now." He dragged her not toward the exit, but toward the back stairs leading to the private quarters. He threw a pouch of heavy coins at the bartender as they passed. "We are not to be disturbed." They burst into the small, cramped room at the top of the stairs. Kyle slammed the heavy iron bolt shut and backed against the door, his chest heaving. His eyes were wild, the golden irises swirling with agitation. Elira stood in the middle of the room, shaking. The adrenaline was warring with the paralytic fear the agent had instilled. "He knew," she whispered. "He called me Subject 7 Alpha." "I know," Kyle said roughly. He pushed off the door and paced the small room. "I heard him. You killed him." "I neutralized a threat," Kale snapped. "He was going to take you." "I could have handled it," Elira shouted, the anger sudden and sharp. "I am trained in diplomacy and combat." "I did not need you to butcher him in front of 100 witnesses." "You were frozen," Kale shouted back, stepping into her space. "He had you pinned with a dampening field and you were sitting there like a statue. If I hadn't stepped in, you would be in a stasis pod on your way back to the lab right now." "So you own me now?" Elira pushed him back, her hands slamming against his chest. "Is that it? I trade one master for another? The Empire wants to use me as a battery, and you want to keep me as a pet?" Kale caught her wrists. He didn't squeeze. He just held them, stopping her assault. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think this is about ownership? You think I give a damn about your title or your genetics?" "Then why?" she demanded, breathing hard, her face inches from his. "Why do you fight for me? Why do you care?" "Because I don't want anyone breaking you," Kale roared, the confession tearing out of him. "I have spent my whole life watching beautiful things get destroyed by that empire and by my own people. I am tired of the wreckage. Elira, I started to care for you in that forest, and I will be damned if I let some bureaucrat turn you into a spare part." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the electricity of the argument. Elira looked up at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of her, but fear for her. It was a raw, terrifying vulnerability that she had never seen in the court of Virelia. "You care," she repeated softly. "Yes," Kale breathed. "I care, and it terrifies me." Elira looked at his lips. The anger in her blood was transmuting. alchemizing into something hotter, more urgent. The brush with death downstairs, the violence, the revelation of her own manufactured nature, it all pushed her toward the one thing that felt real. "Then show me," she whispered. She pulled her wrists free from his grip and wound her arms around his neck. She didn't wait for him this time. She kissed him, not with the clumsy force of the forest, but with a deep, hungry intent. Cale groaned, a low sound in his throat, and his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her. He carried her to the narrow bed pushed against the wall. This time, there was no hesitation. Clothes were discarded with frantic haste. The leather and silk lay tangled on the floor. When skin touched skin, it was like striking a match. Elira pushed him back onto the mattress. She climbed over him, straddling his hips. She needed to feel the weight of him, the reality of him. She needed to be the one moving, not because she wanted to dominate, but because she needed to explore. She ran her hands over his chest, tracing the glowing tattoos. They hummed against her palms. "Elira," he gasped, his hands gripping her hips, guiding her. "Hush," she whispered. She lowered herself onto him. The sensation was a shock of pure pleasure that made her arch her back. A gasp escaping her lips that sounded nothing like a princess and everything like a woman. The rhythm they found was slow, deep, and achingly intimate. Elira watched his face, the way his eyes fluttered shut, the way his jaw clenched. She was undoing him, just as he was undoing her. "Cale," she moaned, saying his name without any filter, without any thought of rank or station. He reached up, his hand tangling in her hair, pulling her down to kiss her. It was a kiss of desperation, of two people clinging to each other on the edge of the world. As the pleasure built, tightening like a coiled spring in her belly, Elira felt a strange heat rising in her spine. It wasn't just biological, and it was the sigil. It was burning. "Elira, you're back," Cale gasped, his eyes flying open. "It's glowing." "Don't stop," she commanded breathlessly, unable to focus on anything but the friction and the heat. They moved together, the intensity climbing higher and higher. As Elira reached the peak, her body convulsing in release, she threw her head back and screamed. At that exact moment, her internal AI, Sphinx, flickered back to life. System reboot initiated. Critical energy surge detected. Source, external, internal hybrid, integration in progress. The pleasure shattered into white light. Elira wasn't in the room anymore. She wasn't in the inn. She was floating in a void of starlight. Beside her, Cale was there, but he was made of golden fire. She looked down at herself. She was made of blue lightning. The vision took them. They stood on a balcony overlooking a city of glass and light. The sky was violet. "Look," a voice echoed, a dual voice, speaking in both the binary code of Virelia and the harmonic chant of Elysia. Elira saw people in the streets below. They were using machines that were powered by song. They were shaping stone with thought. There were no wires, no batteries. The energy flowed freely from the earth into the tech, and from the tech into the people. It was one, Elira realized, her thought echoing in the shared mind space. Plasma and magic. They were the same force. Then, the sky darkened. A shadow fell over the city. She felt the emotions of the past, greed, fear, a desire to hoard the power. She saw the city split. One side encased themselves in metal, trapping the energy in cores, terrified of its wild nature. The other side fled to the forests, rejecting the machines, terrified of the structure, the great sundering. It wasn't a war of ideology. It was a divorce born of panic. The vision shifted. She saw a timeline, a genetic thread spinning through centuries. She saw Cale's ancestors, mages who tried to build machines. She saw her own, scientists who tried to synthesize souls. They were not enemies. They were two halves of a broken key. The convergence. Kyle's voice echoed in the vision. We are the convergence, Illyra. The light blinded them again, and then, with a physical jolt, they were slammed back into their bodies. Illyra collapsed onto Kale's chest, gasping for air, sweat slicking her skin. The room was spinning. The scent of ozone and sex hung heavy in the air. Kyle was staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving. His tattoos were no longer just amber. They were pulsing with a vein of violet light, the color of Illyra's plasma. Did you see it? He whispered. Yes, Illyra breathed, burying her face in his neck. We were one. Our people. We broke the world because we were afraid of how powerful we were together. And now we are the only ones who can fix it, Kyle said. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tighter than before. That's why they want you. That's why they want me dead. We are proof that the war is a lie. Illyra pulled back to look at him. Her violet eyes were glowing with a new intensity, not cybernetic, but something deeper. My mother, the Queen, she knows this. She fears it, Kale said far away, in the heart of the Verilian capital. High Queen Valeria stood before a massive observation window overlooking the orbital shipyards. She was a creature of ice and chrome. Her human features all but replaced by pristine, ageless synthetic skin. Behind her, a holographic display illuminated the dark throne room. It showed a tactical map of the Nakar sector. A red light blinked where the relay tower had gone offline. The subject has synchronized, a technician reported from the shadows. We detected a momentary energy spike in the remote sector. Signature matches the convergence pattern. The Queen did not turn. She stared at the reflection of her own perfection in the glass. She has bonded with the mongrel, the Queen said coldly. It is unfortunate. I had hoped to extract the gene sequence without the catalyst, but it doesn't matter. She raised a hand, her fingers encased in silver gauntlets. Initiate the God-Sight protocol. Your Majesty, the technician hesitated. The cores are not fully charged. Firing the weapon now will require alternative fuel sources. We will have to drain the life support reserves of the lower sectors. Millions will suffocate. Efficiency requires sacrifice, the Queen stated, her voice void of any emotion. Target the Nakar sector. Burn the forest. Burn the ruins. If I cannot harvest the convergence, I will incinerate it. On the screen, a countdown timer appeared. Giant red numerals began to tick down. T-minus 24 hours. Let the galaxy burn, the Queen whispered. Order is all that remains. The journey to the sunken temple of Ethelgard was a descent into hell. To the south of the Crystal Canyon lay the molten sands, a vast shifting ocean of silica heated by subterranean volcanic vents to a permanent, liquid state. It was a landscape of sluggishly moving glass, glowing a dull, malevolent red in the twilight. The heat was physical, a crushing weight that pressed against the lungs and dried the eyes. Illyra stood at the prow of the skiff, a rusted hover repulsor craft Kale had liberated from the pirate docks of the drift. Her scavenger cloak whipped violently in the superheated updrafts. Shields are at 40%, she shouted over the roar of the wind. She was reading the manual gauges, her violet eyes stinging from the grit. If the thermal regulation fails, the hull will warp in 3 minutes. It won't fail, Kale yelled back. He was at the tiller, one hand gripping the mechanical stick, the other extended outward, palm down. A dome of amber light encased the small craft, shimmering as it deflected the worst of the heat. Sweat slicked his face, running through the ink of his tattoos. Just keep watching the sensors for the magnetic dip. The temple is under the flow. Illyra looked at him. He was exhausting himself. The magic required to maintain a thermal barrier against a sea of liquid glass was immense. His jaw was set, the muscles in his neck corded with strain. There, she pointed to a vortex in the magma, a swirling depression where the red liquid spiraled down into darkness. Magnetic anomaly confirmed. It is a gravity well. "Hold on!" Kyle roared. He didn't steer away from the vortex, he drove straight into it. The skiff tipped over the edge. Illyra gripped the railing, her knuckles white. For a terrifying second, the world was a blur of spinning red fire. Then, the repulsors shrieked, and they punched through the surface tension. Silence. They were beneath the magma. The gravity well was an ancient shield, a bubble of force that held back the ocean of fire, creating a dry, cool pocket of air beneath the surface. Above them, the molten roof glowed like a ceiling of embers, casting a blood-red light over the ruins below. The Temple of Ethelgard rose from the darkness. It was a monolith of black obsidian, untouched by the centuries. It was not Elysian. It was not Verilian. It was huge, alien, and terrifyingly silent. Kale landed the skiff on a landing platform of smooth stone. As the engines died, the silence of the deep rushed in, heavy and oppressive. "The Godsight weapon fires in 12 hours, Illyra said, her voice echoing too loudly in the cavern. "The countdown is synchronized to my internal clock." "Then we better hurry," Kyle said, stepping off the skiff. He stumbled slightly, bracing himself against the hull. The barrier spell had drained him. Illyra was there instantly, her hand under his elbow. "You are operating at suboptimal energy levels." Kale looked at her, a tired smile touching his lips. "I'm fine. Just need a minute. The relic is inside, the orb of unity." They approached the massive doors. There were no handles, only a depression in the center shaped like a hand, but the hand had 6 fingers. "Pre-human," Illyra noted, analyzing the geometry. "Or a symbolic representation of the 6 elemental forces." "Both," Kyle said. He didn't touch the door. He spoke to it. "Open. By the blood of the divided, I command you." The stone groaned. Dust, thousands of years old, drifted down as the massive slabs ground apart. The air that rushed out was stale, smelling of incense and decay. As they crossed the threshold, the darkness seemed to thicken. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence. "Stay close," Kyle warned, raising his staff. The crystal tip glowed, pushing back the shadows. This place was built to guard the relic. It defends itself not with traps, but with truth. It shows you what you fear. Illyra stepped forward, her boots clicking on the polished floor. "I have no fear. I only have objectives." But as she spoke, the shadows lengthened. They detached themselves from the walls. The air grew cold. The red light of the magma roof above faded, replaced by the sterile, white glare of a laboratory. Illyra stopped. She was no longer in the temple. She was back in the vats. She was strapped to a table. She could feel the cold metal against her naked back. Above her, faceless figures in white coats hovered, their voices distorted and metallic. Subject 7 Alpha displays optimal symmetry. One voice droned, "Remove the empathy center. It creates hesitation." "Agreed," another voice said. "Initiate the purge." Illyra tried to scream, but she had no mouth. She looked down at her body. She was cut open, her chest cavity exposed. But inside, there was no heart. There was only a hollow space where a machine was meant to go. "I am empty," she whimpered. The scene shifted violently. She was in the throne room. Her mother, the queen, sat on a throne of skulls. But the skulls were not strangers. They were Kyle. Hundreds of Kales. Some burned, some broken, some staring at her with dead, golden eyes. The queen stood up. She was beautiful, terrible, and cold. You broke him, the queen smiled. You break everything you touch, Illyra. You are a weapon. Weapons do not love, they destroy. Illyra backed away, her hands trembling. No, I didn't. I saved him. Look at him, the queen commanded. Illyra looked down. Kale was at her feet, bleeding out, a plasma burn through his chest. The wound was smoking. Why? The hallucination of Kale whispered, blood bubbling past his lips. Why did you make me care? Illyra fell to her knees. The weight of her existence crushed her. She was a fraud, a doll playing at being a woman. She was dangerous to everyone she got close to. I am sorry, she sobbed, curling into a ball. I am sorry. The cold was absolute. It seeped into her bones, paralyzing her. She was back in the stasis pod, the liquid filling her lungs, drowning her in eternal sleep. Illyra. The voice came from a great distance. Illyra, look at me. Hands grabbed her shoulders, warm hands, rough hands. She gasped, her eyes snapping open. The laboratory was gone. The dead Kale was gone. She was on the floor of the obsidian temple. Real Kale was crouching in front of her, his face pale with worry, his hands gripping her arms tight enough to bruise. It's not real, Kale said fiercely, staring into her eyes. Whatever you saw, it's not real. I saw you dead, she whispered, tears streaming down her face, tears she hadn't known she could shed. I saw what I am. I am hollow. Kyle, I was made to be used. No, Kyle said. He moved one hand to cup her face, his thumb wiping away a tear. You were made. Yes, but you are redefining what you were made for. I am weak, she choked out. I collapsed. I failed the test. You felt, Kale corrected her. You felt fear. You felt lost. That isn't a weakness. Illyra, that is waking up. The machine doesn't care if it breaks. You do. He pulled her up, wrapping his arms around her. She buried her face in his chest, listening to the frantic beat of his heart. It was the most reassuring sound in the universe. We are close, he whispered into her hair. The relic is just ahead. Can you walk? Illyra took a shuddering breath. She pushed the horror of the vision into a box in her mind, not to repress it, but to carry it. Yes, she said, pulling back. Her violet eyes were red-rimmed but clear. Let us finish this. They entered the inner sanctum. It was a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling that magnified the view of the molten lava above. In the center of the room, floating above a pedestal of black stone, was the orb. It was about the size of a human head, made of a material that shifted between metal and crystal. It was dull, dark, and dormant. Around the pedestal, the floor was etched with a complex array of glyphs, two distinct circles that overlapped in the center. One circle was inscribed with the geometric angular equations of high physics. The other was carved with the fluid, chaotic runes of the ancient wild. The convergence, Kale breathed. It requires both. He walked to the edge of the circle. He looked at Illyra. The inscription says the vessel must be pure. He translated the runes. No barriers, no armor, no secrets. Illyra understood. It wasn't just about physical clothing. It was about stripping away the defenses they had built their entire lives. Without a word, she reached for the clasps of her scavenger cloak. She let it fall to the floor, then the tunic, then the boots. She stood naked under the red glow of the magma roof. She did not cover herself. She stood tall, her pale skin glowing in the dim light, the silver port on her neck glinting, the scars of her crash visible on her ribs. Kale watched her, his gaze heavy with reverence. He began to undress as well. When he stood bare, the map of his life was visible on his skin. The glowing tattoos, the scars of exile, the purple bruise of his dual heritage. They stepped into the circles. Elira stood on the geometric glyphs. Kale stood on the runes. They faced each other, the dormant orb floating between them. "Take my hands," Kale said. They reached through the space where the circles overlapped, their fingers interlaced. "I give you my chaos," Kale whispered. "I give you my order," Elira replied. It began. It wasn't a gentle flow, it was a collision of worlds. Elira gasped as Kale's magic surged into her. It felt like liquid sunlight, hot and unpredictable. It rushed through her veins, bypassing her neural pathways, igniting nerves she didn't know she had. It was wild, teeming with life, smelling of soil and rain and blood. At the same time, she pushed her own energy into him, the plasma energy, the cold, disciplined power of the atom, flowed from her core into his. Kale arched his back, a groan tearing from his throat. To him, her energy felt like the clarity of a diamond, sharp and absolute. It stabilized his chaotic storm, giving it structure, giving it a spine of steel. The orb between them began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in their teeth. The sensation became overwhelming. It was spiritual, yes, but it was intensely, undeniably erotic. The exchange of energy was a penetration of the soul deeper than any physical act. Elira threw her head back, her mouth opening in a silent cry. The memory struck, not a hallucination this time. A truth. She was inside Kale's mind. She saw a woman with purple eyes, a Varelian defector tied to a stake in a village square. She saw the Elysian elders, their faces twisted with righteous fear. She saw the fire. She heard the woman scream, not for mercy, but for her son. "Run! Kale, run!" Elira felt Kale's childhood agony as if it were her own, the smell of burning flesh, the crushing loneliness of being the boy who caused his mother's death just by existing. "I am here." Elira projected her thoughts into his mind, wrapping her cold, structured presence around his trauma, holding it, stabilizing it. "You are not alone." Then, Kale was inside her mind. He saw the laboratory. He saw the tank. He saw the scientists looking at the embryo that would become Elira, increase the aesthetic parameters. A scientist said, "She must be desirable. If she is not beautiful, the subjects will not trust her. Make her perfect. Make her unable to weep." He felt the cold glass of the tank. He felt the years of isolation, the lessons on manipulation, the programmed responses to affection. "You are real," Kyle projected into her, his warm, chaotic light flooding the cold glass of her memories, shattering the tank. "You are not a design. You are a soul." The connection peaked. Violet lightning erupted from Elira's skin. Amber fire blazed from Kale's tattoos. The energy spiraled up their arms, meeting in their joined hands, and poured into the orb. The relic screamed, a sound of pure joy. A shockwave of light exploded outward. It passed through the temple walls, through the molten sands, shooting a beam of impossible color, a fusion of purple and gold, straight up into the atmosphere. The temple shook. The stones began to sing, a deep, harmonic thrumming that sounded like a choir of giants. Elira. Kyle, the ancient AI of the temple, dormant for 3,000 years, spoke their names. The light faded to a steady, pulsing glow. Elira collapsed forward, her legs giving out. Kale caught her. They sank to the floor, limbs tangled, the skin slick with sweat, breathing the same air. The orb hovered above them, now fully awake, spinning slowly, pulsing with the heartbeat of the convergence. "We did it," Kyle rasped, kissing her forehead. "It's awake." Illyra looked at the orb. It was no longer just a machine, it was a key. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a component. She felt whole. "We have the key," she whispered. "Now we must kill the lock." The ascent was brutal, but fueled by adrenaline. They used the skiff to break the surface again. The orb's energy field now protecting them effortlessly from the heat. They didn't return to the drift. The orb was guiding them now, pulling them toward the nearest high-altitude transmission point where they could interface with the orbital grid. That point was the spire of Barrows, a ruined observation deck on the cliffs overlooking the sand sea. They reached the rooftop of the ancient structure just as the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows over the desert. The wind was howling. Illyra wore her scavenger gear again, the orb strapped to her back in a makeshift harness. She checked the sky. "The God sight activates in 4 hours," she said. "We need to hijack a shuttle." "There is a Virelian outpost 10 clicks east," Kale said, scanning the horizon. "If we can—" He stopped. Illyra felt it too. A displacement of air, a silence that was too sudden. "Move!" she screamed. She tackled Kale just as the air where his head had been sizzled. A sniper bolt, invisible. Silent, they hit the stone floor, rolling behind a crumbling parapet. "Neural disruptors!" Illyra shouted, recognizing the distortion in the air. "Assassins!" 3 figures decloaked on the opposite roof. They were clad in sleek black armor that seemed to absorb the light. They carried long-barreled rifles that hummed with a sickly green energy. "Royal Guard," Illyra identified them, her heart sinking. "The Queen's personal shadows." "Give us the traitor," one of the assassins amplified his voice. "And your death will be quick, Princess." "Go to hell," Kale yelled. He popped up, flinging a bolt of fire. The assassin moved with supernatural speed, dodging the magic and firing a return shot. The green beam hit the stone next to Kale's head. The rock didn't explode. It disintegrated into dust. "They are trying to separate us." Illyra analyzed the tactical situation instantly. "Flanking maneuver, 2 left, 1 right." "I'll take the left," Kale said. "You hold the right." "No, Kale, they have disruptors. If they hit you, they will scramble your bioelectric field. It will kill a mage instantly." "Just shoot!" Kale vaulted over the parapet, using his staff to vault a gap in the roof. He landed amidst the 2 assassins on the left. Illyra rose, leveling her plasma pistol. She fired, pinning down the sniper on the right. She glanced left. Kale was a blur of motion. He was fighting like a demon, his staff spinning, deflecting physical blows. He blasted one assassin off the roof with a gust of wind, sending him plummeting into the sands below. But the second assassin was fast. He ducked under Kale's swing and jammed the barrel of his disruptor rifle into Kale's ribs. "No!" Illyra screamed. Kale didn't have time to block. He did the only thing he could. He grabbed the barrel with his bare hand. The assassin pulled the trigger. The green energy discharged. Kyle screamed. It was a sound of absolute agony. The disruptor beam tore through his magical defenses, short-circuiting his nervous system. He was thrown backward, skidding across the stone, his body convulsing. The assassin stood over him, raising the rifle for the kill shot. Illyra's world narrowed to a single point. Logic vanished. Protocol evaporated. Fear was replaced by a cold, white rage that felt like the birth of a star. She didn't fire her pistol. She dropped it. She didn't run. She reached, deep inside her. The plasma core of her being flared, but she didn't just draw on the tech. She reached for the echo of Kale's magic that still hummed in her veins from the ritual. She grabbed the concept of space and tore it open. "He is not expendable," she shrieked. She thrust her hand forward. A beam of energy erupted from her palm. It wasn't the blue of plasma. It wasn't the amber of magic. It was white, pure, blinding white. It hit the assassin, where there was no explosion. The assassin simply ceased to exist. Armor, flesh, bone, erased from the timeline. The recoil knocked Illyra off her feet. She scrambled up, ignoring the smoking burns on her glove, and sprinted to Kyle. "Kale! Kale!" He was lying on his back, his eyes wide and unfocused. Spasms wrecked his body. The tattoos on his skin were flickering, dimming, dying. "Illyra!" he gasped, blood leaking from his nose. "Can't feel the light." "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice breaking. "That is an order, soldier. Stay with me." She placed her hands on his chest. She didn't know healing spells, and she didn't know medical protocols for hybrids, so she did what they had done in the temple. "Take it," she thought, pushing her own life force into him. "Take my order. Stabilize." She poured her energy into him, willing his erratic heart to beat in rhythm with hers. "He's mine," she snarled at the empty sky, at her mother, at the universe. "You cannot have him. He is mine." Slowly, agonizingly, the convulsions stopped. Kale took a deep, ragged breath. His eyes cleared, the gold returning, though dim. He looked up at her, seeing the tears streaking the soot on her face, seeing the fierce, possessive terror in her eyes. "Illyra," he whispered, reaching up a trembling hand to touch her cheek. "You're glowing." She looked down. Her hands were wreathed in soft, violet fire, not tech, her. "I am adapting," she sobbed, a laugh bubbling up through the hysteria. She collapsed onto him, holding him tight. They lay there on the roof of the world, battered, broken, but alive. The Godsight was waiting. The Queen was waiting. But they had changed the rules of the game. Illyra helped him sit up. She looked toward the north, toward the spaceport where the shuttle waited. "Can you move?" she asked. Kyle gritted his teeth and nodded. "With you? Anywhere." Illyra helped him stand. She picked up the orb. Her face hardened into a mask of beautiful, terrifying resolve. "Good," she said, "because we are going to the capital, and we are going to burn it down." The shuttle broke the cloud layer, revealing the crown of Ethelgard in all its terrifying, sterile glory. It was not a city built for people. It was a city built for gods of mathematics. The capital of the Varelian Empire did not touch the ground. It floated in the upper stratosphere, a sprawling archipelago of platinum spires and suspended gravity rings, held aloft by humming repulsor engines that shook the very air with their power. There was no green here, no chaotic growth, only the white of clouds, the silver of alloy, and the violet pulse of the plasma grid. Illyra stood by the viewport, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. She wore the white ceremonial robes of a penitent, a stark contrast to the scavenger leathers she had shed hours ago. "Heart rate 110, Kale murmured, standing beside her. He was transformed. Gone were the rough tunics of the forest. He wore the high-collared, midnight blue coat of an Elysian diplomat, a disguise fabricated by the Drift's black market tailors. His wild hair was slicked back, and the glowing tattoos on his neck were concealed by a collar of dampening silk. But the real disguise was in his pocket, the orb of unity. It hummed against his hip, projecting a subtle biometric distortion field. To the sensors of the approaching docking bay, Kale read as a baseline human envoy, and Illyra read as a submissive, non-combatant biological unit. "They are scanning us," Illyra whispered, her eyes tracking the invisible laser grid sweeping the hull. "If the orb falters for a microsecond, the turret defenses will vaporize us." "The orb won't falter," Kale said, his voice calm, though his eyes remained fixed on the approaching spires. "It wants to be here. Can't you feel it? I'm hungry. Illyra could feel it. The relic wasn't just a machine, it was a bridge, and it sensed the massive concentration of energy in the capital. It was pulling them toward the center. The shuttle docked with a hiss of decompression. The airlock cycled open. A squad of Imperial guards stood in formation. They were faceless, their helmets smooth domes of black glass, their plasma rifles held at port arms. "Identify," the lead officer barked, his voice synthesized. Illyra stepped forward. She lowered her head, adopting the posture of the defeated. It was the hardest physical action she had ever performed. Every fiber of her training screamed at her to stand tall, to command, to dominate. "Princess Illyra," she said softly, returning to the light of the grid, "I bring a negotiator from the outer territories to discuss the terms of the Elysian surrender." The officer scanned her. The red light of his visor swept over her retina, her neural link, her biosignature. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. "Identity confirmed," the officer said. "The High Queen awaits in the Celestial Spire. You are to be escorted to the detention suites pending decontamination. The envoy will be housed in the guest wing." "No," Illyra said, lifting her head just enough to show a flash of royal irritation. "The envoy remains with me. He carries the codes for the Elysian energy grid. If he is separated from me, the protocols wipe the data. Unless you wish to explain to my mother why she lost the keys to the enemy kingdom?" The officer hesitated. The logic held. Bureaucracy was the one force in the empire stronger than the military. "Proceed," the officer grunted, stepping aside. "But you are being watched." Idiom. The guest wing was a gilded cage. The walls were made of smart glass that could turn opaque or transparent at a remote command. The furniture was sleek, uncomfortable, and hovering inches off the floor. There were no corners, only curves, designed to prevent dust accumulation and mental stagnation. As soon as the heavy blast doors hissed shut, sealing them in, Illyra slumped against the wall, letting the mask drop. "We are in," she breathed. "Phase 1 complete." Kyle paced the room, scanning for bugs. "Don't get comfortable. The air in here is recycled. It tastes like judgment." He walked to the window. Below them, the city stretched out, a labyrinth of light. Far above, at the pinnacle of the central spire, a massive ring structure was visible, the God Site. It was dormant now, but technicians were swarming over it like ants on a carcass. "We have 6 hours until the Queen initiates the firing sequence," Kyle noted. "We need to get to the throne room before then." The door chime sounded. It was a polite, melodic tone that set Illyra's teeth on edge. "Enter," she commanded, straightening her spine. The door slid open. It was not a guard. It was a woman. She was tall, slender, and striking, with hair like spun silver and eyes that were cybernetic implants of swirling mercury. She wore a gown of shifting holographic fabric that left little to the imagination, designed to distract and disarm. "Cousin," the woman purred, stepping into the room with a feline grace. "Vespera." Illyra nodded coldly. "I see you haven't been recycled for parts yet." Vespera laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "And I see you survived the mud and the bugs. We had a betting pool, you know. I wagered that you would be eaten by a dire wolf within 2 days." Vespera's mercury eyes slid past Illyra and locked onto Kale. Her expression shifted from mockery to intrigue. "And this," Vespera murmured, walking toward him, "must be the savage who found you." Kale didn't flinch. He stood his ground, playing the part of the stoic envoy. "I am Kale, representative of the Circle." "Representative," Vespera circled him, her fingers trailing lightly over the fabric of his coat. "You are quite robust for a diplomat. Most of the men in court have replaced their musculature with carbon fiber. You are all warm meat. She stopped in front of him, invading his personal space. She looked up, her lips parting slightly. Tell me, savage, is it true what they say about the Elysians, that you channel energy through your bodies? That must be stimulating. Elira felt a spike of heat in her chest that had nothing to do with plasma. It was an ugly, dark twisting in her gut. Vespera, we are tired. State your business. My business is security, darling, Vespera said, not looking away from Kale. The council wants to know if this one is truly cooperative. I volunteered to interrogate him. She placed a hand on Kyle's chest, right over his heart. I can be very thorough. Kyle caught her hand. He didn't shove her away, but he didn't let her proceed. He held her wrist with a firm, professional grip. I am here to negotiate with the Queen, Kyle said smoothly. Not to entertain the court jester. Vespera's eyes narrowed. The rejection stung, but it also excited her. She leaned in, whispering something in Kale's ear that Elira couldn't hear. Then, she pulled back, smirking. We shall see, Vespera said. She turned to Elira. The Queen will see you in 1 hour. Do try to wash the stench of failure off yourself before then. She swept out of the room, the door sealing behind her. The silence she left behind was heavy. Kyle exhaled, wiping his ear as if a fly had landed on it. Charming family you have. Elira didn't move. She stared at him. What did she say to you? Kyle walked over to the wet bar, pouring a glass of water. Nothing important. Just a threat wrapped in an innuendo. She thinks she can seduce the codes out of me. She touched you, Elira said. Her voice was low, vibrating with a frequency that made the water in Kale's glass ripple. Kale turned, surprised by her tone. Elira, it's a game. She's probing for weaknesses. She had her hand on your chest. Elira took a step toward him. She smelled of pheromone-spiked perfume. I could smell it from across the room. Did you like it? What? Kale frowned. Don't be ridiculous. She's a snake. She is beautiful, Elira countered, the insecurity of the vision clawing at her. She is what I was designed to be. Perfect, manipulative, desirable. Is that what you want? A machine that knows how to play? Elira, stop. Kyle put the glass down. She kissed my cheek. It meant nothing. It tasted like metal and ambition. It meant nothing? Elira repeated. She closed the distance between them. Her eyes were flashing violet. That is the problem with you diplomats. Everything is a maneuver. Everything is expendable. I am not a diplomat, Kyle snapped. I am the man who walked through hell with you. Why are you doing this? Because she touched what is mine, Elira growled. The confession hung in the air, raw and possessive. Before Kale could respond, Elira shoved him. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a forceful slam that pinned him against the smart glass wall. You do not let them touch you, she hissed, grabbing the lapels of his coat. You are not a curiosity for the court. You are not a toy for Vespera. Kale looked down at her. He saw the fear behind the rage. He saw the terrified woman who had been told her whole life she was replaceable. Then remind me, Kale challenged her, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. Remind me who I belong to. The invitation snapped the last thread of Elira's control. She didn't kiss him. She devoured him. Her mouth crushed against his, hungry and desperate. She bit his lip, drawing a drop of blood, tasting the copper and the life of him. Kale groaned, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no air left between them. They stumbled toward the bed, a tangle of limbs and discarded clothes. This was not the slow, exploratory lovemaking of the forest. This was war. It was a claim. Elira tore his shirt open, buttons skittering across the floor. She ran her hands over his tattoos, her nails dragging against his skin, leaving red marks that faded instantly under his healing factor. "Mine," she gasped against his neck. "Say it." "Yours," Cale rasped, flipping her over so she was pinned beneath him. He looked down at her, his golden eyes burning. "I am yours, Illyra. Only yours." He entered her with a single, fluid motion that made her arch her back and cry out. The sound was lost in the hum of the city outside. The act was frantic, driven by the ticking clock and the looming death that awaited them. Every touch was a reassurance that they were still alive, still solid. Illyra wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper, trying to fuse their very atoms together. She felt the plasma in her blood rising to meet the magic in his. Sparks of violet and amber danced across their skin, shorting out the sensors in the headboard. "I love you," she screamed, the words tearing out of her throat, unbidden, unplanned, and absolutely true. Cale froze for a second, looking at her with wide, wondrous eyes before collapsing against her, burying his face in her shoulder as the climax took them both, shattering the world into a million shards of light. An hour later, they stood before the doors of the throne room. They were composed. Their clothes were straightened, but there was a current running between them, an invisible tether that was stronger than any shackle. Illyra held her head high. Cale stood at her right hand, his hand resting on the hilt of a concealed vibroblade. The doors opened. The throne room of Ethelgard was a cathedral of void. The walls were transparent, showing the stars and the curvature of the planet below. In the center, suspended over a pit that dropped all the way to the planet's surface, was the throne. High Queen Valeria sat waiting. She did not look like a mother. She looked like an algorithm given form. Her skin was porcelain white, her eyes were glowing red sensors, and her body was encased in a suit of bio-armor that pulsed with the heartbeat of the city. Standing around her were the High Council, 12 figures in robes of gray, their faces hidden behind masks of silver. "Daughter," the Queen's voice amplified through the room. It came from everywhere and nowhere. "You are late." "I was detained," Illyra said, walking forward. She did not bow. "I have brought the Elysian envoy, as requested." "The mongrel," the Queen corrected, and she didn't even look at Cale. "You have brought the mongrel." She stood up, descending the steps of the dais. She moved with a terrifying silence. "You believe you are clever, Illyra," the Queen said. "You believe you have hidden the orb. You believe you have masked your biosignatures, but you forget who built you." The Queen raised a hand. Suddenly, the gravity in the room shifted. Illyra and Cale were slammed to the floor, pinned by an invisible weight. "The orb!" Cale gasped, reaching for his pocket. "Is mine," the Queen finished, and with a flick of her wrist, the orb flew from Cale's pocket and into her hand. She held it up, inspecting it with cold curiosity. "The convergence," she mused. "Such a messy, chaotic concept. The ancients believed it brought balance. I believe it brings fuel." "Mother, don't!" Illyra struggled against the gravity field. "The weapon. It will destroy the planet's core. If you fire the god sight, you kill Elysia. But you destabilize Varelia too. It is suicide." "It is evolution," the Queen replied. She looked down at Illyra. "Do you know why you were created, 7 Alpha?" "To lead," Illyra grits out. "To die," the Queen said simply. The words hung in the vacuum. "The god sight requires a trigger," the Queen explained, walking slowly around Illyra's prone form. "A biological spark to fuse the plasma and magic reserves. A battery that can hold both energies for the nanosecond required to ignite the beam." She stopped, looking down at her daughter with something that might have been pity, if she were capable of it. You are that battery, Illyra. You were genetically woven to hold the charge. When I plug you into the core, you will burn. You will be consumed entirely. But in that moment of combustion, you will give the Empire dominion over the stars. Illyra felt the blood drain from her face. I am a fuse? You are the greatest sacrifice in history, the Queen said. Be proud. This is inefficient, a voice cut in. It was Counselor Vax. He stepped forward from the circle of gray robes. The princess is unstable, Vax argued, his voice rasping through his mask. She has been compromised by emotion. If she fights the integration, the weapon could misfire. He pointed a gloved finger at Kyle, who was struggling to breathe under the gravity press. The hybrid, Vax said. He carries the blood of both. He has already bonded with the orb. Why waste the princess? Drain the mongrel. His death will trigger the reaction just as effectively. The Queen paused. She looked at Kale, then at the orb, calculating the variables. He is impure, the Queen stated. He is available, Vax countered, and he is expendable. Illyra's heart stopped. They were going to kill him, not in a fight, but on a table and like a lab rat. No, she screamed. She looked at Kale. He was looking at her. He wasn't afraid. He was mouthing one word. Together. Illyra closed her eyes. She reached deep inside herself. Not to the neural link. Not to the plasma. She reached for the feeling of the rain in the forest. She reached for the taste of the oats. She reached for the heat of Kale's skin against hers. She found the magic he had poured into her. She pulled. Illyra whispered, opening her eyes which now glowed pure white. Am not a battery. She unleashed a scream of psychic fury. It wasn't a command code. It was a shockwave of raw emotion. The glass walls of the throne room shattered. The vacuum of space roared at the edges of the shield. The sudden depressurization threw the counselors off their feet. The gravity field flickered and died. Kyle moved instantly. He didn't attack the Queen. He attacked the air. Velcras! He shouted, slamming his fist into the floor. A shockwave of wind blasted outward, knocking Vax and the guards backward. Kale scrambled to his feet, grabbing Illyra's hand. The orb! Illyra yelled. The Queen was still standing, anchored by her armor. She held the orb tight. Seize them, she commanded. A dozen combat drones dropped from the ceiling, their red eyes cycling to kill mode. Run! Kale pulled Illyra toward the service exit. They sprinted through the corridors of the spire. Behind them, the sound of plasma fire and shattering glass echoed. We need a way off the spire, Illyra shouted. The docking bay is locked down. The bridge, Kale yelled back. The bridge of ascendance. It connects to the launch rails. They burst out of the spire onto the open-air walkway. The bridge of ascendance was a ribbon of translucent energy stretching between the central spire and the outer ring. It was a mile high, wind-whipped, and terrifyingly narrow. They ran. Below them, the clouds swirled. Above them, the Godsight ring was beginning to rotate. A low, thrumming sound vibrated through the metal of the bridge. It's charging! Illyra checked her internal chronometer. Without me? How? She's bypassing the safety, Kyle realized. She's using the orb directly. She's going to force the ignition without a biological filter. That will destroy the city, Illyra screamed. She doesn't care. They reached the midpoint of the bridge. Suddenly, a drone dropped from the sky, hovering directly in their path. Then another, then three more. They were cut off. Behind them, the door to the spire blasted open. The Queen's royal guard poured out, rifles raised, trapped. Illyra looked at Kale. His chest was heaving. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He looked beautiful, "We can't go back," she said. "We can't go forward," he said. The God-sight weapon groaned. A beam of red light began to coalesce in the center of the ring above them. The heat was instantaneous, baking the air. "Illyra," Kale said, grabbing her shoulders. "If we die here—" "We don't die," she interrupted him. She looked at the drones, then at the charging weapon, then at him. She remembered the lesson from the forest. Power isn't always force. "We jump," she said. "What?" Kale stared at the abyss below. "It's a 10,000-foot drop." "Trust me," she said. "Trust the convergence." The guards opened fire. Green bolts of disruptor energy tore up the bridge. Illyra grabbed Kale's face. She pulled him down. They kissed. It was a kiss of defiance. A kiss that ignored the army, the weapon, and the gravity. In that contact, the loop closed again. Plasma met magic. Logic met chaos. The energy flared around them, a bubble of violet and gold. "Now!" she screamed. They leaped over the edge. As they fell into the clouds, the God-sight weapon fired. The beam missed the planet. It struck the bridge where they had just been standing, vaporizing it instantly. The shockwave hit them, not as a killing blow, but as a gust of wind, wrapped in their own shield of impossible hybrid light. Illyra and Kale fell like a comet toward the darkness of the lower atmosphere, leaving the burning city behind them. The stolen interceptor screamed through the upper atmosphere, a jagged streak of silver against the bruised purple of the stratospheric sky. Illyra sat in the pilot's cradle, her hands fused to the haptic controls. She was not flying with the neural link. She had severed the connection to the local grid to avoid detection. She was flying on instinct, on the raw, terrifying reflex of muscle and eye. "Shields are down to 18%, Kale shouted from the gunner's well behind her. "That orbital station is throwing enough flak to level a continent." Through the viewport, the God-sight station loomed like a mechanical moon. It was a ring of obsidian metal rotating around a central spire of blinding white light. The energy radiating from it was so intense it rippled the fabric of space, creating visual distortions that made the stars look like they were melting. "We do not need shields," Illyra gritted out, banking the ship hard to avoid a barrage of plasma torpedoes. "We have the key." "The Queen has the key," Kale countered, his voice strained as he deflected a piece of debris with a burst of kinetic magic. "She has the physical shell," Illyra corrected. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, reaching out with her mind, not to the cold binary of the Varelian network, but to the warm, chaotic hum of the convergence. "We are the software. The orb knows us. It will let us in." She pushed the throttle to maximum. The interceptor accelerated toward the station's hangar bay. The blast doors were sealed, a solid wall of titanium alloy meters thick. "Illyra! The doors!" Kale yelled. "Pull up!" "Trust the connection!" she screamed. She reached out with her left hand, pressing it against the cockpit glass. She visualized the orb of unity pulsing in the heart of the station. She felt its song, the harmony of logic and wildness. She pulled on that thread, open, a microsecond before impact. The massive blast doors shuddered. The station's operating system, confused by the conflicting authority of the Queen and the orb's bonded masters, hesitated. The orb overrode the lockdown. The doors slammed open. The interceptor shot through the gap, engines screaming as Illyra threw the craft into a reverse thrust spin. They skidded across the hangar deck, sparks showering like fireworks, screeching metal tearing through the silence of the vacuum-sealed bay. The ship smashed into a fuel loader and came to a halt, smoking and ruined. Illyra kicked the canopy release. It blew off with a hiss of explosive bolts. She scrambled out, coughing in the acrid smoke. Kale was right behind her, his coat torn, his face smeared with soot, but his eyes burning with golden fire. "We have 10 minutes before the firing cycle completes," Kale said, checking the rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the deck plates. "The core is 3 levels up. Then we run," Elira said. They moved through the corridors of the war station. The place was empty of personnel. The Queen had evacuated the non-essentials to conserve oxygen for the weapon's cooling systems. It was a ghost ship, lit by the strobing red emergency lights. They reached the lift to the central core. Elira bypassed the encryption with a single touch of her hand. Her biosignature was still royal, still recognized by the dumbwaiter subroutines. The lift ascended. Elira checked her weapon, a standard-issue plasma rifle she had pulled from the wreck. Kyle held his staff, the wood now charred black from the sheer volume of energy he had channeled, the crystal at the tip glowing with a dangerous, unstable light. "Kyle," she said softly, not looking at him. "If we do not make it—" "Don't!" He stopped her. He took her hand, squeezing it hard. "We walk out of here. That is the deal." The lift doors opened. The core chamber was a sphere of glass and light suspended in the center of the station's ring. Below them, the planet Elysia rotated, vast and vulnerable. Above them, the machinery of the god site focused its aperture. In the center of the room stood the control node, a pillar of white light. Floating inside the pillar was the orb of unity. It was screaming, spinning so fast it was a blur, its energy being siphoned into the massive capacitors lining the walls. And standing before it was High Queen Valerius. She was plugged into the mainframe. Cables made of silver light connected her bioarmor to the station's heart. She hung suspended a foot off the ground, her eyes closed, her expression one of rapturous data integration. Surrounding her were the elite guard, 6 warriors in white armor, wielding double-bladed energy pikes. "Mother!" Elira shouted, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. The Queen's eyes snapped open. They were no longer red. They were white, voids of pure energy. "Irregularity detected." The Queen spoke, her voice a chorus of 1,000 synthesized tones. "The component has returned to the source. Stop this!" Elira threw her weapon down, holding her empty hands up. She walked onto the glass bridge. "You do not have to destroy the planet, the convergence. It can heal the empire. We can have energy without conquest. We can have power without blood." "Healing is inefficient," the Queen droned. "It implies prior damage. I am not healing the galaxy. Elira, I am optimizing it. By killing millions? By removing the chaotic variables," the Queen said. She looked at Kale. "Starting with the glitch." She gestured with a finger. The 6 elite guards moved. They didn't charge. They blurred. Their speed was enhanced by the station's local time dilation field. "Kale, left!" Elira screamed. She didn't reach for her fallen rifle. She reached for the plasma conduits running under the floor. She pulled the energy up, shaping it into a whip of violet fire. She lashed out, catching the first guard around the neck. The plasma burned through the white armor, and she threw him into the abyss below. Kale was fighting 3 at once. He spun his staff, creating a vortex of wind that deflected their energy pikes. He slammed the butt of the staff into the ground, and the gravity in his immediate vicinity reversed. 2 guards floated helplessly into the air, flailing, before Kale blasted them with a bolt of lightning. But the Queen did not join the fight. She simply watched, analyzing. "You fight with emotion," the Queen observed. "It makes you slow." She raised her hand toward Kale. She didn't fire a laser. She fired a data spike. A beam of jagged, corrupt code shot from her fingers, hitting Kale square in the chest. He didn't bleed. He froze. Kale screamed, a sound that wasn't physical. It was the sound of a mind being shredded. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. Kale. Illyra turned, horror washing over her. I am not killing him, the Queen stated calmly, adjusting the flow of data. I am reformatting him. I am erasing the Elysian memories and the trauma, the love. When I am finished, he will be a blank slate, a perfect, obedient drone. Kyle looked up at Illyra. His golden eyes were flickering, fading to a dull gray. Illyra, I can't. Remember, the forest. No! Illyra shrieked. Diplomacy died. The daughter died. The warrior was born. Illyra launched herself at the Queen. She didn't use magic. She didn't use plasma. She used momentum. She tackled her mother mid-air, slamming into the suspended figure. The impact tore the data cables from the Queen's back. The Queen shrieked, a glitching digital sound of outrage. They crashed onto the glass floor, sliding toward the edge. You ungrateful wretch! The Queen backhanded Illyra. The blow was enhanced by hydraulics. It threw Illyra across the room. She smashed into a console, tasting blood. The Queen rose, hovering again. She summoned a sword of pure hard light from her gauntlet. I made you! The Queen roared, her human mask slipping, revealing the steel skull beneath. I designed you to be perfect, and you threw it away for feelings. I threw it away for freedom. Illyra stood up, wiping the blood from her mouth. She ignited her own blades, twin daggers of violet plasma she conjured from her wrist ports. They clashed. It was a blur of light. Blue against violet, logic against passion. The Queen fought with perfect algorithms, predicting every strike. Illyra fought with desperation, changing her rhythm, feinting, using the chaotic footwork Kale had taught her. Kale was still on his knees, fighting the erasure. The remaining guards were closing in on him. Illyra, Kale gasped. The core, she's locked it to your biosignature. She's using the link. Illyra parried a blow that would have taken her head off. She realized the truth. The Queen wasn't just piloting the station, she was routing the firing command through Illyra's own dormant neural link, even severed. The hardware was there. The Queen was using Illyra as a remote processor. As long as Illyra was connected to the grid, the weapon would fire. The Queen drove her back toward the edge. Surrender. Submit. It is the only logical outcome. Illyra looked at Kale. One of the guards had kicked him onto his back and was raising a pike to finish him. Kale's tattoos were black. He was burned out. He had nothing left. Logic, Illyra whispered. You want logic, Mother? She looked at the control node, the pulsing pillar where the orb spun. A thick bundle of fiber optic nerves connected the node to the central transmitter. That was the receiver. That was the link that listened to every Varelian mind in the galaxy. Illyra deactivated her plasma daggers. The Queen paused, confused by the surrender. Illyra turned and sprinted, not at the Queen, but at the node. What are you doing? The Queen screamed, realizing the calculation was too late. Illyra didn't hesitate. She reached into her own belt and pulled a physical knife, the obsidian blade Kale had used to peel bark in the forest. A primitive tool. She slammed her hand onto the control node, interfacing her palm with the bioreader. User identified, Princess Illyra. Connection established. The system welcomed her. The neural link at the base of her skull lit up, humming with the comfort of the grid. It tried to pull her back into the cold embrace of the hive mind. Access denied, Illyra wept. She plunged the obsidian knife not into the machine, but into the port on her own hand, pinning it to the console, and then drove her other hand into the fiber optic bundle, ripping the cables free. But that wasn't enough. The signal was wireless, and it was in her head. She looked at Kale. He was watching her. his eyes wide with terror as he realized what she was doing. "Elira, no!" She reached behind her head. She grabbed the external casing of her neural link. "I resign," she whispered. She ripped it out. It wasn't supposed to be removable. It was fused to her spine. The pain was a white supernova that obliterated her vision. It felt like she was tearing her soul out of her body. There was a wet snap. The link severed. Elira collapsed, the bloody piece of silver tech clattering across the glass floor. Silence. The humming of the godsight weapon stopped. The red light in the aperture died. The Queen fell from the air, her connection to the station broken instantly. Without the biological key, without the processor, the system crashed. "You..." The Queen lay on the floor, her armor sparking, her digital eyes flickering. "You blinded us. You blinded the Empire." The station groaned. The containment field holding the orb collapsed. The energies inside, the plasma and the magic, mixed without a regulator. "Critical failure," the station's AI announced, its voice slowing down, warping, core implosion imminent, evacuate. Gravity failed. Elira floated up from the floor, blood droplets orbiting her like red satellites. She was conscious, but barely. She couldn't hear the grid anymore. The silence in her head was absolute. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. Kyle kicked off the wall, floating through the zero-gravity chaos. He grabbed the guard threatening him and threw him toward the ceiling, then propelled himself toward Elira. "Elira!" He caught her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She looked at him. Her eyes were unfocused. "Is it quiet?" "It's quiet," Kale choked out. "You did it." The orb of unity, released from the machine, drifted past them. It was dull, its energy spent for now. Kyle snagged it out of the air and shoved it into his coat. "Escape pods," he said. "Now." The station was tearing itself apart. Sections of the wall were peeling away, sucked into the vacuum. The Queen was screaming commands at guards who could no longer hear her, as the artificial atmosphere vented into space. Kyle kicked off the central pillar, holding Elira tight against his chest. They flew through the debris field of the core chamber, dodging floating glass and sparking wires. They reached the airlock. The escape pods were primed. Kale shoved Elira into the pod. He scrambled in after her and punched the launch sequence. "Launch!" The explosive bolts fired. The pod shot away from the station just as the core collapsed. Behind them, the godsight didn't explode outward. It imploded. The massive ring crumpled like a tin can crushed by a giant hand. The white spire twisted and vanished into a singularity of light, taking the Queen and her ambition with it. Then, the shockwave hit. The pod tumbled end over end. The inertial dampeners whined, struggling to compensate, inside, in the cramped darkness. Kyle unstrapped himself and floated over to Elira. She was pale, the back of her neck bandaged with a strip of his torn coat, blood seeping through. "Elira?" He touched her face. She opened her eyes. They were violet, but they were dim. No HUD, no data stream, just eyes. "I can't hear them," she whispered. "I can't hear the ships. I can't hear the traffic control. I can't hear the weather." "I know," Kyle soothed, stroking her hair. "It's gone. I thought..." She took a shuddering breath. "I thought power was knowing everything. Seeing everything." She looked at her hand, the hand that had held the knife, the hand that held his. She looked at Kyle, seeing the soot on his face, the fear in his eyes, the love that radiated from him warmer than any star. "I finally understand what power is," she whispered, tears floating off her lashes in zero-G globules. "It's the freedom to feel, It's the silence where you can hear your own heart. Kyle smiled, a broken, beautiful expression. And what does your heart say? It says, "Kiss me," she replied. He leaned in. Their lips met as the pod stabilized, drifting in the silent void. Through the viewport behind them, the debris of the god site burned up in the atmosphere of Elysia, streaking the sky with falling stars, a meteor shower that signaled the end of an empire and the beginning of something new. 6 months later, the moon of Alara stood on the very edge of the chartered systems, a border world of red dust and turquoise fungal forests. It was a place of no strategic value, which made it perfect. The structure was simple, a dome of woven wood and salvaged hull plating. It sat in a valley where the twin suns warmed the earth. Inside, a dozen children sat in a circle. Some were Elysian refugees with glowing eyes. Others were Varelian orphans with silver ports on their necks. "Focus," Kyle said. He was walking the perimeter of the circle. He wore simple linen robes, his hair tied back. He looked younger, the weight of the war lifted from his shoulders. "Don't try to control the stone. Ask the stone to move." A young Varelian boy frowned, staring at the pebble in front of him. "It is illogical. The stone has no auditory receptors. Logic is a tool, not a cage," a woman's voice said. Elira walked into the circle. She wore a tunic of Elysian weave, but her boots were Varelian combat grade. Her neck was covered by a high scarf, hiding the scar where the neural link had been. She knelt beside the boy. "Use your mind to understand the stone's structure, the atoms, the density." "Like a scan?" the boy asked. "Yes," Elira smiled. "But then, use your heart to ask it to dance." She held out her hand. She didn't reach for a plasma core. She didn't reach for a battery. She reached for the space between her and the boy. She closed her eyes. She didn't see data. She saw the warmth of the sun, the smell of the dust, the love of the man watching her from across the room. A spark appeared in her palm. It wasn't the angry, buzzing blue of plasma. It was a soft, swirling sphere of golden light, laced with violet veins. It was warm. It was alive. It floated up from her hand, drifting over the children's heads. They gasped, reaching up to touch it. It burst into a dozen harmless butterflies of light that fluttered around the room, filling the dome with laughter. Elira looked up. Kyle was leaning against a support beam, watching her. He winked. She looked at her hand, the light fading but the warmth remaining. She wasn't a princess, and she wasn't a weapon, and she wasn't a battery, and she was Elira. And for the first time in 100 years of genetic history, she smiled. Not a practiced court smile, but a real one, crinkling the corners of her eyes. She was free.